Some people vanish into the hands of serial killers and are never seen again. But a rare few do the impossible and they escape. And their survival, it exposes those monsters hiding among us. And thanks for tuning into Scary Mysteries today. Here are women who escape serial killers, 5 stories of survival. Number 5, Lisa. In the early morning hours of Saturday, November 3rd, 1984, the streets of Tampa, Florida were quiet in the way that cities get after midnight. Not asleep, just thinned out. It was along one of these long and desolate stretches of asphalt that 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh was pedaling her bicycle home from work. Now, she'd done this ride plenty of times before, so it was a familiar route, and that's when the hum of a vehicle approached her from behind and slowed down to a crawl beside her. Now, Lisa was a high school student living with her grandmother. By most accounts, she was responsible, independent, and used to handling herself. She worked late shifts at a local donut shop, and after closing, she'd often ride her bike home through the still warm Florida night. It was just after midnight when that Dodge Aspen pulled alongside her, and the driver offering her a ride. She declined, but the car kept pace anyway. And seconds later, the man got out, grabbed her, and forced her into the vehicle. And that driver was 28-year-old Bobby Joe Long, a drifter and a man with a violent criminal history. Unknown to Lisa, already a serial murderer operating across Florida. Inside the car, Lisa was restrained. He then drove her to a remote rural area north of Tampa, to a small house hidden behind the trees. So no neighbors in sight and definitely no easy escape routes. Inside the house, Lisa was bound, and Long plainly told her he intended to kill her, as he had done this with others before, but not before he had his way with her. But Lisa, she never panicked in a way that shut her down, the way many people would. Instead, she began doing something very specific. She started talking. She asked him questions about his life, about where he'd grown up, and about his family. And she listened and responded and treated him like a person, not because she trusted him, but because she understood something crucial. If he saw her as human, it would be harder to kill her. Over the hours that followed, she carefully built a psychological connection. She told him she believed he didn't have to do this anymore, that he could still change and that she'd help him do so. Eventually, Long let his guard down a bit, but it wasn't enough. And so Lisa explained that her father was terminally ill and that her family was dealing with too much. Her murder would be devastating to everyone, and that worked. She promised not to say anything, so Bobby blindfolded her and dropped her off near Hillsborough and Rome Avenues. Lisa didn't keep her side of the agreement, though, and went right to police. She then gave them something extremely rare in crimes like this: a description of the attacker, a description of the house, a description of the car, and crucially, details of what he had told her about himself. And based off this, within days, officers located the house, and Bobby was arrested. Inside the home, they found evidence linking him to not just this crime, but several other unsolved murders from across the entire state. And most of those victims had disappeared after being seen near roadways late at night, and their bodies were later found dumped in rural areas. Lisa McVeigh's escape didn't just save her life, it ended a serial killer's run. Long was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death, was executed in 2019 at the age of 65. Number 4, Carrie. In July of 1984, Carrie Swenson was training alone in the mountains near Big Sky, Montana. She was 23 years old, an elite biathlete, and a serious Olympic hopeful. Her training required long hours of endurance skiing through isolated terrain, often with a rifle strapped across her back. This wasn't reckless, it was routine. The mountains were her workplace. That afternoon, the snow was deep but consistent, and Carrie moved through the trees at an even pace, skis cutting a line she'd practiced over and over again. The route was familiar, one her body handled without too much thought, and there was nothing to suggest the day would be any different from the others before. And that is until two men stepped out from the trees. They were armed, and one held a rifle chest high and aimed it on her. The other didn't raise his weapon at all and instead moved toward her on the thin trail, cutting off her path before she could turn back. He told her to stop, and Carrie hesitated for less than a second, and it was enough. The shot came without warning, hit her in the chest and dropped her instantly into the snow. She was still conscious though, could still see and still hear. When they reached her, she was trying to get up, ready to fight as instinct took over. But these guys swarmed her and then did something Carrie didn't expect. But they worked quickly to bind her wound, keeping the rifle trained on her. While this was happening, the realization came to her that these guys didn't want to kill her. That maybe that would have been better. Because from there, they got her to her feet and then forced her deeper into the mountains, the snow soaking through her clothes, her steps uneven and unsteady. And as they moved, they talked, not to her, but to one another, about a world they believed had already collapsed. Government was the enemy, civilization was a lie. Anyone outside their camp was deemed a threat. And Carrie didn't really know what they were saying, but she understood one thing very clearly. They believed every word of it. She was then led to a crude camp hidden in the wilderness, where over the next several days, Carrie was kept under guard, interrogated, and pressured into becoming part of their vision. They told her that she would be their wife, and that she would help them build a future away from civilization. In a way, trying to convince her, even though they made it clear that escaping was not an option. Meanwhile, search teams were already moving through the mountains, and Carrie's failure to return had been noticed quickly. The terrain made the search difficult, but the response was immediate and growing. As pressure closed in, the men decided to move camp. During the relocation, one of them lagged behind with Carrie, rifle in hand. The moment was brief and chaotic and imperfect, but it was enough, and Carrie broke free and ran for it. She didn't get too far, though, and was shot again, this time at close range and collapsed to the ground. The men fled, believing she wouldn't survive. Hours passed by before rescuers reached her. By the time she was airlifted out, she had lost massive amounts of blood and suffered extensive internal injuries. But through it all, she lived. The men responsible were Don Nichols and his 19-year-old son Dan, survivalists living off the grid, armed, paranoid, and increasingly unstable. And they were captured shortly after Carrie's rescue. Dan didn't live long enough to ever face trial, though. He took the coward's way out. Don, on the other hand, was convicted on multiple charges related to kidnapping and shooting. And in a way, you could also blame him for his own son's death, considering how he'd brainwashed him. Swenson survived, but she never returned to competitive biathlon. The injuries ended her Olympic hopes. She rebuilt her life away from the spotlight, carrying the physical and psychological weight of what happened in those mountains. The men believed the wilderness placed them beyond society's rules. They were wrong, though, and Carrie Swenson lived long enough to prove it. A well-built wardrobe isn't about chasing trends. It's about having pieces that work together and actually hold up over time. That's what Quince does best, in premium materials, thoughtful design, and everyday staples that are easy to wear and easy to rely on. I recently grabbed a few collared tees from Quince for my vacation coming up. One of them is cashmere. Yeah, cashmere tee sounds fancy, but it's actually perfect. It's comfortable, soft, and ideal for those cooler evenings by the beach when you don't want a heavier layer, but you still want to look put together. Quince works directly with top factories and cuts out the middleman, so you're not paying for brand markups, just quality clothing. Everything's built to handle daily wear and still look good season after season. and they only partner with factories that meet high standards for craftsmanship and ethical production. Honestly, they have really great clothes and they don't cost anywhere near what you'd expect, so go check them out. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/scarymysteries for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/scarymysteries. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/scarymysteries. Number 3. Carol. On the afternoon of November 8th, 1974, the sun was already starting to sink over Salt Lake City, Utah. Rush hour traffic crawled through the city, and people were heading home and life moved at its usual pace. Except on this day, in this place, a serial killer was on the hunt. 18-year-old Carol Duranch had no reason to believe this day would become part of one of the most notorious crime stories in American history, and yet it did. She was simply sitting in her car at the Fashion Place shopping mall, waiting for her brother, who was inside running an errand. And that's when a man approached her window. And Carol was just a high school student, confident and outgoing, but naive in that young, inexperienced type of way. And this killer, he knew exactly that. He was dressed neatly, polite and calm as he flashed what appeared to be a police badge. He explained to her that there had been a report of someone trying to break into cars in the lot. She wasn't a suspect, but he had one in custody, and wondered if she could take a look and let him know if she had seen him doing anything out of the norm. And Carol hesitated, but wanted to be a good citizen, agreed to take a peek. After all, it would only take a moment. She locked her car and followed him to a nearby tan Volkswagen Beetle. And she got inside as the man said he'd bring the suspect out, but instead this was all a trap, and the guy reached for a set of handcuffs. And what followed was not a quiet kidnapping. It was a sudden, violent struggle inside a cramped car. And Carol fought back hard, kicking, punching, and clawing, refusing to submit. The man smacked her with a crowbar over the head, and as the blood ran down her face and blurred her vision, she kept on fighting. She managed to force open the door and threw herself onto the pavement. Drivers passing by took notice, and many started honking their horns. The attacker panicked and then fled. And Carol stumbled to nearby shoppers for help. The police were called, and she was taken to the hospital and treated for head injuries. And here's the crucial detail. Carol didn't just say, "A man attacked me." She gave police a detailed physical description of him. His voice, his mannerisms, the car, the fake badge, everything she could remember. And at the time, no one knew it yet, but Carol had just survived Ted Bundy. And by that point, he had already killed at least 8 other women. 2 months later, another young woman named Deborah Kent disappeared from a nearby school parking lot in Utah. Her case fit a chillingly similar pattern. Detectives put together a suspect sketch based heavily on Carol's description. It would take another 3 years, but eventually police arrested a law student named Theodore Bundy in Florida, and there they arranged a lineup. Carol Duranch walked into the room and immediately identified him without hesitation. Carol's testimony became one of the first major courtroom moments linking Bundy to violent assault. She sat feet away from the man who tried to kill her and calmly described exactly what he had done. Her identification and testimony helped establish Bundy's methods: fake authority, a small car, handcuffs, and controlled parking lots. It was the first crack in a case that would later reveal a killer responsible for dozens of murders across multiple states. Number 2. Tiffany and Kara. In the summer of 1996, Tiffany Hayes was going about a normal day in Virginia. She was only 15 years old, but independent, used to moving through public spaces without thinking twice. Nothing about the moment she crossed paths with a stranger suggested it would become a dividing line in her life, but it did in a huge way. A man had approached her from the side, and close enough that she had to turn toward him to hear what he was saying. The conversation never got loud or drew attention. What changed instead was the space around her. The sidewalk narrowed, and the exits disappeared. And by the time Tiffany understood what was happening, she was already being moved away from the street and toward a waiting car. And just like that, she was gone. What followed from there wasn't chaotic, it was controlled from the start. He took her to a residential house, ordinary enough to disappear into its street. Inside, she was restrained and kept out of sight. The rules were laid out immediately and reinforced without emotion. Where she could sit, where she could move, when she was allowed to speak or even look up. And Tiffany now belonged to him. And she understood quickly that fighting him wouldn't change where she was, so she gave in to all his demands and changed what she focused on. She paid attention to the house, how often he left the room, and how long he stayed gone, the sounds that came from the outside. She noticed what made him tense, and what made him careless, and what seemed to reassure him that she wouldn't resist. She wasn't waiting for somebody to find her at all, and she was learning how he thought. And Tiffany was held for 24 hours, and at some point, he made a decision that would define everything that came after. He let her go. And Tiffany quickly reported everything. And she described the man, the vehicle, and the timeline to police. But this guy knew that would happen, so before he let her go, he had blindfolded her and drove around for a period of time, deliberately disorienting her. She never really knew what house she was in, and so the man remained free. 6 years passed by, and in June of 2002, 14-year-old Kara Chamberlain, who was living in South Carolina, was at a friend's house. They were hanging outside when a man approached her and suddenly produced a gun.
I noticed it going out of the neighborhood, and then very quickly I noticed the car coming back into the neighborhood.
Kara was forced into his vehicle at gunpoint and then driven away. She was taken to his home where she was restrained and assaulted. Like Tiffany years earlier, Kara understood the panic would not improve her chances, and she focused on the details. The layout of the house, objects in the room, and sounds from outside. She waited. Later, when the man fell asleep, Kara escaped, and she ran barefoot to a nearby home where police were called immediately. Officers responded quickly, but the man had already fled in his vehicle, and he was identified as Richard Evonitz. By the time Tiffany Hayes escaped back in '96, Rich had already murdered 2 young sisters in Virginia. In 1998, he murdered 15-year-old Amanda Duffy, so a bona fide serial killer, and those 3 are the only ones we know about for certain. Within days, police tracked him down in Maryland, and they pulled him over while he was still fleeing in his vehicle. Knowing what he had done and not wanting to face the consequences, he stopped the car, got out, and pulled out a gun, ending it with a single shot. Both Tiffany's and Kara's stories exist because the girls involved stayed alive long enough to tell them. And survival doesn't always stop a killer, and sometimes it only delays the moment when someone else is forced to finish the job. Number 1. Desiree. On Tuesday, September 13th, 2016, 31-year-old Desiree Hartsock was homeless in Ashland County, Ohio. Now, she'd been moving between places for weeks, sometimes staying with acquaintances and sometimes using vacant places when nothing else was available. Abandoned houses were a part of the landscape there. They were unsafe but familiar enough. Now, that evening, she crossed paths with a man who offered her a place to stay. His name was Sean Great, though she didn't know that just yet. And Sean told her he knew of an empty house where she could get out of the cold and sleep safe and sound. There was no immediate threat, no signs of violence, just an offer that matched what she needed in that moment. Desiree got in his car, and that's when the horror began. The house Sean took her to was boarded up with no electricity. It was certainly abandoned, but not empty of intention. Because once inside, the situation changed quickly. He moved through the room methodically, checking windows and pushing furniture into place, making sure there was no clear line of sight from outside and no way out. Desiree's phone was taken from her and set out of reach. Great then pulled out a knife and made it clear she wasn't free to leave. He told her point blank that he had killed before and would do it again if she didn't cooperate. For the next several hours, the woman was kept inside that place under constant threat. She was physically restrained with nowhere to go, her mind racing as she tried to figure out the next move, even though she didn't really have one. From there, she was then assaulted, and Great would move in and out of the room where he left her, leaving briefly and then returning without warning to make sure she hadn't moved from her place. All this while he dangled the knife in front of her as a means of control. And that unpredictability of his movement made it difficult to tell how much time had passed, and that was the point. As the night went on, Great became less focused on the woman and more focused on taking his drugs. And so as the hours wore on, his movement slowed and his attention waned. At one point, without leaving the house and without alerting him, Desiree managed to reach a phone and dial 911. She whispered to the dispatcher, explaining that the man who had abducted her was asleep nearby.
Is there any way you can get out of the building?
I don't know without waking him, and I'm scared.
She said she believed he was right outside the door and begged for officers to come quickly. They did, and police then arrested Sean Great later that night without incident. And Desiree, it appears, truly did escape the grips of a madman, because what was uncovered after this incident was far worse than anyone expected. Great went on and confessed to murdering multiple women, possibly receive a lighter sentence. He led investigators to the bodies, many of which were hidden in abandoned houses across the county. He admitted that he specifically targeted women who were homeless or otherwise isolated because he believed they would not be immediately missed. Desiree Hartsock was the only woman he took who escaped alive. As for the lighter sentence, well, Sean never got that. In 2018, Great was convicted of multiple counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to death. And right now, he remains on Ohio's death row. Serial killers, 5 stories of survival. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed it. And y'all stay safe out there, and I'll see you over in the next one.